I'm particularly excited about the idea of a plot workshop because different writers are good at different things, right? And I'm good at some things, and I'm okay at some things, and then there's plot. It is a literal truth, that every first draft I've ever written has, in the margin, a note from me to me saying, should something happen? Because things happening, which is another way to say plot, is a fairly important tool, right? It's the primary motor for page turningness in a book, and I've heard some people think that's a good thing. So I'm particularly grateful to Professor Tilghman for sharing tips and tricks for making that happen in our prose. Christopher Tilghman was born and raised in Boston, but his life has revolved around his family's farm on the eastern shore of Maryland. In addition to the 4 novels of the quartet, recently concluded with On the Tobacco Coast, his other books include the novel Roads of the Heart and the short story collections In a Father's Place and The Way People Run. Tilghman graduated from Yale University, served 3 years in the Navy, has worked at a sawmill as a journalist and as a corporate copywriter. He is the former director of the creative writing program at the University of Virginia and former editor of the profoundly esteemed journal Plowshares. He's the winner of a Whiting Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Ingram Merrill Foundation Award, among many others. Please help me welcome back to the Lit House podium, Christopher Tilghman.
Did I not do it last time? Yeah, only so well. Well, okay, great. Thank you for being here. It's been a wonderful visit for myself and my wife Caroline. I'm very grateful to Roy and James and Linda for hosting us so wonderfully. I enjoyed working with some students today who were kind enough to share their work with me, and that was fun. And this has been a return for me. I was recollecting last night that this was the first college I read at as my career started in 1991. So it feels like kind of the right place. Maybe I'm getting towards the end of it. Anyway, so what I'm going to try to do tonight is an experiment. Now, you may think at my age, I'm a little old to be doing experiments. I should be delivering, finished goods. But, never too old to crash and burn. So the reputation stops here. That's all I can say, all of what Roy said. But I did want to think about, in a slightly theoretical manner, this notion of what is finally even more fundamental than plot. And these terms get thrown around with abandon, plot, story, narrative, whatever, and I'll try to unwind it a little as it's useful. But as I was saying last night in reading that story, the way I discovered what the story was word by word. And it happened that it came very quickly, but the other story I was talking about, the title story from my first book, it came much more slowly. It took a matter of, I think I worked on it for 5 years. So you don't really want to do that. The question is, as much as possible, to avoid wasting your time. Now, any minute you spend at your desk is productive time. I have felt over the years very firmly that even when I'm sitting writing, the Quick Brown Fox, whatever it is, that was finally confronting whatever issues were keeping me back. And it's surprising how much work you're getting done even in the midst of despair. So in any event, what I was talking about last night was this. I offered 2 radical ways of writing a short story, and I'm really just talking about a short story now. short stories have their own particular challenges. As a short story writer, when I finally started writing novels, a friend of my wife's and mine said, "You won't believe how easy it is to write a novel." And I said, "Hey, no, that's fine." And it is indeed. It's a long slog, but the feeling about the short story is it's always going to leave your grasp somehow. That it's not working. I love Roy's thing about his marginalia. Something has to happen. We had a friend. My wife Carolyn here is also a novelist, and so we've sort of been in this world together for many years now. We had a friend whose partner had inscribed for him a silver bracelet with the inscription, "It's not working," which is basically what he would say at the end of the day. It's a gloomy guy after all, but anyway, he would teach, "Well, how's it going today, Rob?" "It's not working." Anyway, so the question is maybe to dig a little deeper into this glorious form and to see how it comes about. So I promised two radically different ways of thinking about it, of writing it. And the first way, again, was discovering word by word. And let's call that 1 on the scale. And let's say there's something 10 on the scale that is knowing exactly what your story is going to involve, who, what's going to happen. You've even thought in terms of some scenes, blocked it out a bit. 5 or 6 scenes would be typical for a story of some story length, 4,000 words, 5,000 words, something like that. And so what I'm going to be presenting to you is, and this is a predictable laugh line, 11 on the scale of knowing what you want to do before. This is a rather notorious approach, and I offer it for several reasons, but the first is because it's funny. So at the same time that you're thinking, this is crazy, there are some very fundamental things about story that I want to get across. Then we will do as promised, you will each have a chance to do this thing that Frank O'Connor is talking about here. And I'll be looking for all the students to share theirs, and this may work, it may not. I'm not promising, a big prize here. Anyway, this person I'm talking about is Frank O'Connor, an Irish short story writer, worked in the theater for many years, staged from 1903 to 1966. He's very, very well known. He wrote 150, 200 stories, almost all of them involving policemen and clergy. He mentions policemen and clergy, and virtually all of his stories involve one or the other. He was born in County Cork, and he lived his life, his professional life largely in Dublin, but then spent in the 50s a lot of time here in the Midwest, I think at Beloit, I think it was, I may be wrong. He ended up teaching at Stanford and then became ill and died, by my standards, very, very young, age 63. Among the other other books of his you might know about or I might recommend is a collection of essays about short stories called The Lonely Voice. And it really is certainly the first real attempt to sort of understand the form and how it works. What I'm doing now is going a step back from that. This is about writing a short story. This isn't about analyzing. This is getting to the fundamentals of it. So now I'm going to read Frank O'Connor's Little Chit Chat in the BBC, 1959. You'll hear a very gendered sort of language. That was in 1959 in Ireland. A person was a man. That's just the way it was. Then I'll talk a bit about it, And as I say, then give it a try. And then we can, if that works and you all get something, there's another stage we can go to, but maybe just starting here. Okay, this is 1959 on the BBC. There he is chatting away. And again, I mean, finally, the introduction is just his own self-deprecating manner is your cue for the way he's dead serious about this, but he knows that, you know, he's in a minority. Writing a story one man's way. Once when I was lecturing in America and as usual could not think of a title for my lecture, someone advertised it as One Man's Way. And that seemed to me such a good title that I wanted to use it again. Because short story writing is my job, and as all of us who write stories will know, there's only one way to do that job, and that is the way you do it yourself. I am dealing here with one man's way of writing a story, and the thing this man likes best in the story is the story itself. Now let's pause on that one. This is not a tautology. He's not saying the thing I like about chocolate is chocolate. He's making a distinction between the thing I like about the story is the story itself. Well, what is this story? What is this slightly abstract yet rock hard machine at the center of this game? That's pretty hard. It's quantum physics. It can be abstract and rock solid at the same time. But you know, where is it? How do we find it? What in the world is this story? And there's one way to begin to sort of delve into what O'Connor's talking about, is to think of it this way. We all know the story of Snow White, but we all know the story of Snow White, but which narrative are we talking about? There is a distinction here between story and narrative. It's kind of fundamental. This is something that's been around since the Russian formalists in the first part of the 20th century, and we know that there are certain elements to the story of Snow White, mirror, you know, prince, poisoned apple, whatever it is, I forget. But you know, which narrative do we know? Do we know the Grimms, the original Grimms, and the Grimm brothers were just collecting all sorts of other versions? Do we know the Disney version? Do we know the Donald Barthelemy version when Snow White is living in Brooklyn with 7 guys, Harry, you know, Clem, Steve, Frank? Do we know indeed, I was just checking today to see, and apparently there's a big splashy feature about to come out, another Snow White. There have been hundreds of versions of Snow White. Which narrative do we know? So what is that distinction between, I like the story itself, says Frank O'Connor. And okay, we'll go on from there. I am dealing here with one man's way of writing a story, and the thing this man likes best in the story is the story itself. A story begins when someone grabs you by the lapel and says, "The most extraordinary thing happened to me yesterday." I don't like the sort of story that begins with someone saying, "I don't know if it's a matter of any interest to you, but I'd like to describe my emotions whilst observing sunset last evening." I'm not saying that the second man may not have important things to say, things far more important than those the first has to say. But that particular tone gives me the shivers. I like the feeling that the storyteller has something to communicate, and if he doesn't communicate it, he'll burst. The story can be anything from the latest Shaggy Dog story to an incident so complex that for the rest of your life you'll be wondering what the meaning of it was. Let me tell you a story that has made me wonder. Once when my father and I were staying in a little seaside place in County Cork, we got into conversation with a farmer whose son had emigrated to America. There he had married a North of Ireland girl, and soon after she fell very ill and was advised to go home and recuperate. Before she went to her own family, she spent 6 weeks with her husband's family in County Cork, and they all fell in love with her. It was only when she had left that they discovered from friends in America that their son had been dead before she left America at all. And why would she do a thing like that to us, the old farmer asked. And for years I've asked myself the same question. Sometimes a story leaves you with a question. Sometimes it answers a question that has been in your mind. I had always felt ashamed of the horrible snobbish attitude I had adopted to my own father and mother when I was growing up, an attitude for which there was no justification. Then a couple of years ago, my wife and I were out walking in the little American city where we live, and we came upon my son standing in a street corner with a girl, his first girl. I was wearing an island beret, which I found very comfortable in the American winters. Instantly, his face grew black and her face lit up. And it was as plain as though the pair of them had said it, that he was mortified by the spectacle of his degraded old father, who knew no better than to wear a knitted cap in the street. And she was thrilled at the thought of a father who did not dress like every other American man she knew. At that moment, I understood my own horrible snobbery and realized that falling in love always means being a bit ashamed of one's own parents and a bit enthusiastic about others. At the age of 17, we all have ambitions to be adopted. But before I wrote that story, or would allow any student of mine to write it, I had to see exactly what it looked like. I find it easier to see it if it is written in 4 lines. 4 lines is only an ideal, of course. I don't really quarrel with 5, and sometimes a truly difficult subject may require 6. But 4 is the best length. 4 is a seed, anything more is cutting from someone else's garden. I mean the sort of subject that begins like this. Mary Martin, unmarried, age 22, is a school teacher in Belfast. She is the daughter of respectable parents, her father being employed in the shipyard, and her mother a dressmaker. Instantly, I feel tied hand and feet by school teaching, Belfast, shipbuilding, and dressmaking, and have the impression that I'm never going to see the subject through all these trimmings. That is why I want to see it cut to 4 lines, even if this involves using algebraic symbols. In that way, the story I told you about the old farmer in County Cork would be something like this. X marries Y abroad. After Y's death, X returns home to Y's parents, but does not tell them Y is dead. Now, I'll interrupt here. That much I've been hearing about this for years. Frank O'Connor and this sort of crazy thing. And the version of it that I had in mind before I finally located this, it took some doing. This was before the internet when I was finally able to locate it. I've always heard it that if you could describe your story in 4 lines, it was good. It was interesting, and if it was interesting, you know that. As Frank O'Connor is the first person to say, there could be something in the person describing sunset, his emotions whilst observing sunset. But this sort of sense of if you can distill it and look at it, and if it seems to have meaning, this again is this idea of this fundamental machine at the heart of this whole fiction game, then it's kind of worth doing. And part of this, the reason that I'm proposing all this to you, or describing all this to you, is not so much to think that any one of you, I certainly never have, would do this as a way of writing a story, but I have used this as a way of thinking exactly what Roy was saying, is exactly what our friend Ralph is not working. I have to have a way to abstract what I'm trying to do. I have to figure out what I'm really trying to do. Am I really just here to describe Mary Martin, her father in the shipyard, her mother a dressmaker? No, I'm not. I'm trying to sort of ask a question. So it has been that I've sort of drawn back from a floundering computer screen or typewriter and done this, and it has some usefulness. Okay, back to Frank. That method looks crude, but from my point of view, it has advantages. It enables me to forget all about County Cork and farming, and north of Ireland and the United States, even to forget the sex of the people concerned. so that I can imagine what the consequences would be if X were a man instead of a woman. It gives me freedom to try out the story in terms of any place or group of people who happen to interest me at the moment and who may perhaps illustrate the subject better than those to whom it originally related. Now you see this is starting to get very peculiar if you start to think about it, that he's got this sense that there's this machine there. I keep using the term, it's the only one that makes sense to me. And it's sort of there for the grabbing. It's not that, this is why I say this is a sort of more fundamental level of thinking about fiction than even plot. Because when you describe a plot of a short story, you would say Mary Martin lives in Belfast, her father is this, and whatever. I mean, that's sort of part of your understanding of the larger whole. When you talk about plot, you're really talking about summary. And that involves the characters, their age, their gender, their everything. Connor's saying, no, we gotta start earlier than that. We've got to look at it with this crazy little way. Okay. Obviously there are limitations to this, he allows. You could not write a story like My Little First Confession, his most famous story, right? The most anthologized, the other ones who gets the nation involving IRA, IRA incident. Obviously, okay. You could not write a story like My Little First Confession about a Protestant family. But I always felt there was something wrong with the poetic quality of any short story that adheres too closely to one place or nationality or religion or profession. One of the stories of mine I like best was told to me originally about a well-known English actor and a London girl. But I did not know anything about English actors and very little about London girls, so I set the story in Dublin. Just because I was able to do that without seriously affecting the subject, I felt it was a better story as I told it. The necessity for freedom seems to me to hold for every aspect of storytelling. Take clergymen, for example. When I write about clergymen, I try not to think about clergymen. The same with lawyers, the same with policemen. There they are. A man's profession should be demonstrated by the circumstances of the story, and the writer's business is to get past the given circumstances and find in the clergyman, the lawyer, the policeman, whatever it is that makes him a recognizable individual human being and not a mere professional figure. Whatever makes the clergyman have maybe a passion for amateur theatricals, the lawyer for roses, and makes the policeman sing in the parish choir on Sunday. This is what gives a story by Chekhov what I call interior perspective, so that instead of a flat surface of narrative, you get a texture like life itself, something you can walk in and out of, move about in, and catch people from odd angles. Before I start the serious business of writing a story, I like to sketch it out in a rough sort of way. We are at stage 2. I like to block out the general outlines and see how many sections it falls into, which scenes are necessary and which are not, which characters it lights up most strongly. At this stage, it is comparatively easy to change scenes about in order to change the lighting so as to make it fall where you want it. At a later stage, it requires considerably more fortitude. Of course, a close examination of the 4 lines of the subject should give you a fair idea of what this treatment should be like, but it's surprising how often it does not. Now, one of the things, of course, also that he's talking about, the fortitude required is, of course, and he'll get to this, our love of our own sentences, which have a way of sort of haunting us to the end of our days. But he's also talking about handwriting. You know, he's talking about moving scenes around. Oh, God, you know, I did all my first writing on a typewriter, and you wanted to move one scene 3 pages up, you had to type the whole thing all over again. Terrible. So, more fortitude. Anyway, here, for example, are 2 themes handled by students of mine. One described how, when he was a schoolboy, his mother took him out of school one day and brought him to a suburban railway station where she pointed out to him a good-looking girl. "Follow her wherever she goes," said his mother. The girl got on a train and the boy got into the same compartment. A few stops up the line, she got out, and he followed her off the train and down the ramp, leading from an upstairs platform to the street. Below him in the street, he suddenly saw his father's car and realized what his mother had made him do. The other story was told by a student from New York. It was about the only son of a Jewish widow who kept a mean little shop in a New York slum. For close to a year, the boy had been robbing the till of quarters and 50-cent pieces to keep himself in movies and coats. One day he came home from school to find that his mother had been coshed and the till robbed by a Jewish thug. Instantly, the boy wanted to call the police and report the thief, whom his mother had recognized. But his mother said in horror, "Isn't it bad enough for poor Mrs. Solomons to have a son like that without my handing him over to the police?" A little while later, the boy noticed that he'd stopped stealing from his mother. Both of these were excellent themes, the second a beautiful one. But for the life of me, I couldn't have said without working them out in class whether they should be told in the first person or third. That is one of the hard choices a young writer has to make. By using the first person, you can get effects of depth and feeling that are impossible by any other method. You can see it for yourself in the first subject. I saw my father's car standing below in the street has many times the emotional effect than Peter saw his father's car standing in the street. In the second, I stole money from my mother is stronger than Isaac stole money from his mother. In fact, in the second subject, it seems to me so strong that I should find it hard to treat the story in any other way. If you think of it in the third person, there's little to choose between the boy and Solomon's, and all you can do is mark the analogy, as Joyce does in Counterparts. But the fact is that the boy who's really acted on the story clearly sees the distinction himself. It is only gradually and almost unconsciously that he becomes aware of the analogy. But the first subject is a much more difficult problem. You can get the same effect only by obliterating the whole relationship of the parents. In other words, and ignoring whatever diabolical fury there was in the mother that made her involve her innocent son in such a sordid episode. Can you afford to ignore that? Can you ignore the possibility that the father was really a decent man who was driven into devious courses by his wife's hysterical character? So he's saying that in third person, you look at the whole thing from outside, and you can include all this, whereas the boy doesn't know anything. That's the whole point. Anyway, okay. This is the reason why in class I insist on this blocking out of the story, which I call a treatment. The students all hate it. They always want to begin right away with, "It was a spring evening, and under ice-cold skies, the crowds were hurrying homeward along 3rd Avenue, where the neon signs on the bars were beginning to be reflected in the exhausted eyes of office workers." This is the sort of thing that makes me tear my hair out, because I know it is 10 to 1 that the story should not begin on 3rd Avenue at all, that whatever I may say later about the necessity for putting it in the first or third person, somehow or other, the student is going to work that story back to 3rd Avenue on a spring evening when the neon lights were beginning to be reflected in the exhausted eyes, etc. Final interjection here. He feels that this story that this student is writing, the exhausted eyes of office workers, is kind of fair game. He says, "No, I want to take your story and write it properly." Odd way to think about stories. Anyway, okay. Now that you know something about my shocking character, you probably have already perceived the difficulty the student put me in. He has already surrendered his liberty for the sake of a pretty paragraph, and young writers love pretty paragraphs. So do old writers, by the way. So it's going to take something like a major operation to cut that pretty paragraph out and let him begin to think again about his subject and do it properly. The time for fine writing comes when everything else is correct. When you know how the story should be told, whom the characters are that you want to tell about, and the light falls not on the eyes of office workers, but where you as a storyteller want it to fall, dead on the crisis, the moment after which everything had changed. The moment in the first subject when the boy realizes what his mother had made him do to his father, and in the second, when the old Jewish lady says the words that will in time reveal to her son that he too is a thief. Those of you who know something about my work will realize that even then, when you have taken every precaution against wasting your time, when everything is organized and according to the rules, there's nothing left for you to do but produce a perfect story, you often produce nothing of the kind. My own evidence for that comes from a story I once wrote called First Confession. It's a story about a little boy who goes to confession for the first time and confesses that he had planned to kill his grandmother. I wrote the story 25 years ago, and it was published, and I was paid for it. I should have been happy, but I was not. No sooner did I begin to reread the story than I knew I had missed the point. It was too spread out in time. Many years later, a selection of my stories was being published, and I rewrote the story, concentrating it into a single hour. This again was published and became so popular that I made more money out of it than I'd ever made out of the story before. You'd think that at least would have satisfied me, but it didn't. Years later, I took that story and rewrote it in the first person because I realized it was one of those stories where it was more important to say, I planned to kill my grandmother, than to say, Jackie planned to kill his grandmother. And since then, you will be glad to know, whenever I wake up at 4 in the morning and think about my sins, I do not any longer think of the crime I committed against Jackie in describing his first confession. The story is as finished as it's ever going to be, and to end on a note of confidence, I would wish you to believe that if you work hard on the story over a period of 25 or 30 years, there's a reasonable chance you will at last get it right. Okay, I leave that with you. Now, Linda has made copies of this unusual document, and well, you can come get it if you want it afterwards, and I'll put them here. So here's this sense that I didn't write my own story right. I didn't think it through. I didn't make it as good as it could be. This was material that I had sort of wasted. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do this, to think of a story and write these 4 lines.
When you say 4 lines, do you mean 4 sentences or 4 lines of, like, on lined paper?
I'm going to tell you. Great question.
Okay.
So here are the 4 lines. Okay. The story I read last night of mine, On the River Shore. What would it look like if I did the Frank O'Connor formula? So this is that story. A witnesses B committing murder. A goes to C and reveals that B is his father. C and associates help B cover up the crime. Later in life, A returns home to bury B and reflect on these events. Frank O'Connor would not allow me to reflect on these events. It's already sort of getting too much in the scene, really. So, we can imagine what he's saying. A witnesses B committing murder. Well, I mean, maybe A should be not a 12-year-old boy. Maybe he should be a 5-year-old girl. A goes to C and reveals that B is A's father. Well, how about if A goes to C and reveals that B is C's father, your father, right? So you can sort of fiddle this, and you get an idea that there is this sense of the sort of best way to shine the light on this series of events. It's a little abstract, I admit, but it can be done. So here are the 4 lines. Now we're going to play a game that's a little bit, we're going to get to a little Aristotle and everything here. And then I'm going to let you give this a try. I don't know if it's going to work, but anyway, we'll give it a try. But sort of line 1 is the situation, the opening of the story. In my case, A witnesses B committing murder. Well, we saw that in the first 500 words. That is the sort of where the story is going to happen within the context of someone witnessing someone shoot someone. So that's line 1. If we look at O'Connor and his version of the of the girl that goes to America and comes back. He says, what does he say? X marries Y abroad. Okay. So that's the situation. X is going abroad, they've been married, also an Irish person abroad. That's the opening of the story. The second is the development, the ideas and states created by the situation. Cecil says in my story, he realizes he has to tell someone. That's in the development here. A goes to C and reveals that B is A's father. That's the sort of developing that, and you can imagine, well, how many scenes we can do here? Well, if I think of my own story that I'm using as a model, I would say that was, there were, well, it's hard to say. What's a scene? I'm even confusing myself over here. Anyway, okay. So, but the second is this development. The third is the resolution. And this I'm going to talk about. Revelation and recognition, finally. And then the fourth, reconciliation. How the situation was altered. In my story last night, one of my purposes, and the student who so nicely asked that question, for those of you who are here, why did I jump forward 30 years in time? I really wanted to say they got away with it. That Cecil's life was not destroyed. Even his father's was not. And so that's the sort of how the situation was finally altered, was that Cecil was put on this path to get educated, to go to a Baltimore suburb, to live in Towson or something, and raise 3 children in middle-class comfort. Now the thing about the O'Connor story that I need to, among several caveats, is that this slightly favors a story with shock in it. And that's not what I'm talking about. Now let's think about stories with sort of shocks in them. Let's think about, Carver's The Small Good Thing. I hope people are still reading Raymond Carver. They may not. You all may not. But still, you're forgiven if you don't. But it's a story about some parents who order a cake on their son's 8th birthday. They've gone to the baker, and then on the way home, he's on a bike. I think he falls off and gets hit. He knocks his head, and the boy goes to hospital, and he dies a couple of days later. But during this time that the boy is dying and the parents are going back and forth in the hospital, I get kind of weepy thinking about this story, very moving. They're getting these phone calls saying, what about Timmy? What about Timmy? And all these harassing phone calls, and they can't figure out possibly, what it's about. Well, the shocker is, it's the baker calling saying, are you going to pick up the cake? Well, sort of slap you in the face. Any number of other ones. Here's one that unfortunately has been in the news a little bit lately. And again, I won't get into it, but some of you will know what I'm talking about. Alice Munro's story, Vandals. Through the whole story, there's this strange situation where this young couple has broken into a house, and she's totally trashing the place. And you sort of can't figure out why. It's a piece of genius that the reader is still willing, the reader isn't stopping, as one might in a workshop, and say, I don't know, why is she doing this? You don't sort of make it make sense, you make sense of it, and you can't make sense of it. Well, then it's revealed in the end that she's doing it because the person that owns the house has sexually abused her. That isn't, that's not, all stories in the world do not do that. Sometimes, as I was saying today to some of the students I met with, it's the tiniest moment. A very, very flat little line. Here's a story about it, it's this sort of long story about a guy in sort of an altered state, really driving around the West. goes to a little town. And it's a story that this thing happens, this thing happens, this thing happens, this thing happens. And that was sort of part of it, because he's obviously sort of losing control. Turned out to be the title story of my second collection. But it was very episodic. It was, as Ian Forster said, it's just and then, which is, by Forster's standards, not the way to tell a story. And so I wrote this, I worked hard on it, and I finally sent it to my agent, who was very, very tough with me, and was not at all afraid to say, this stinks, I don't even want to show this. And so she said, Caroline's laughing, boy, the years that we had with Maxine in my life. Anyway, she was great, I loved her dearly, she made my career, but she was tough. Those of you that are thinking about writing, get used to the fact that this can be kind of tough. But in any event, so I showed her this story. And she said, well, he does this, he does this, he does this, so what? And I said, well, yeah, that's right, he does do this and this. So I took it home, bruised and wounded, and let it sit for a couple of months, maybe 6 months. And then I went back to it, and I added a single sentence at kind of the 7/8 moment. This is where stories, they're going to happen, they often happen. Everything seems to be resolved, we're ready to go. I added a single sentence that said, he wonders if he should feel angry about any of this, talking about my character, comma, coming in town and being kicked out and this and that, and sort of I summarized this. I had it in mind that I was going to just send it back to my agent and say, look, this is just the story. But here it is, I've worked on it, and this is just it. And, this is what I had in mind, and this is what I'm doing. She called up the next day and said, it's fabulous. She showed it to the person, an editor of the New Yorker at the time. He accepted it by return mail. One sentence that just said, and think about after, he wonders if he should feel angry about any of this. I can't even explain to you why that moved. This is a long story. This is 9,000 words or something. I can't imagine why these 20 words moved that story from something that was all over the place and meaningless to something that seemed people liked. So anyway, that's the sort of, when I say there's this resolution, it can be tiny. It can be just looking at the person in next to you, and I mean, this is the magic of this thing. So think about the resolutions that you might be talking about that might be available to you. I'm sure there are at least 10, probably 20. Let me think. I can think of a few. Okay. Aristotle would tell us revelation or recognition on the part of the hero. Hero figures out something, or something's revealed to him. Fine, that's fine. Okay. Well, then how about this? Revelation or recognition about the events on the part of the reader. This is the Alice Munro story. This is why this woman was doing this. There it is. That's resolution. Okay. Let's get a little bit more abstract. A recognition of form. One finally figures out what the writer is doing. There's a glorious. I had a student, the short story, that was so beautifully done in time that I couldn't figure it out until the moment. My God, she's telling it backwards. It was the most fabulous moment. You get up from your desk and you say, God, I feel young and alive, with that kind of thing. That's a recognition of form. That's not about, some great, no one has to get shot and buried for that. It's just to understand what the intent of the writer is. You reveal, here's what I'm doing. And it's just slick. The understanding of the narrator is unreliable. You all know that term. It's kind of an overused term, but it is great when you guys say, wait a minute. In the Alice Munro story, hey, wait a minute, this isn't happening at all, or something. Another resolution. a change in our attitude or opinions now that the ending has been reached. Well, that's a little bit more towards the ending, but what this does is it changes this moment I'm talking about, changes the sense of everything's gone before. And short stories are very end-weighted. You read them and you hold everything in abeyance until you get to the end. And you have this term, what happens, you read with the anticipation of retrospection. You say, I know what's going to happen. And when you put down a short story that really knocks you out, just at the last word, what you're doing, I'm telling you, what you're doing is you're shuffling through every little event in the story and realizing, oh, that's because of that, that's because of that. Fabulous stuff. Okay, so now let's give this a whirl. I'm asking you to develop a story in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's just impossible to do, but we're trying. So think of the 4 lines. First is the opening of the story. And remember, you're using A's and B's, but also as you're doing it, be thinking, what would my story be different if A is a 7-year-old man rather than a dog? But maybe A is a dog, you know? Anyway, okay. So line 1 is the situation. Line 2 is this development. What happens in the situation that starts the ball rolling? In my case, A goes to C and reveals that B is A's father. The third line is this resolution, revelation, recognition. This is the sort of the money line. But you can find a way maybe to make it as subtle as some of these kinds I'm talking about. O'Connor was really talking more about socking you in the face. So, and then finally, this reconciliation, how do you see this situation resolved? So, given the world, I'm going to ask everyone that wants to just read it, and we'll think. I wonder if that's a good story. Okay? Give it a try.
What was the last line?
The reconciliation. It's sort of a return to the situation in the sense of how it's been altered. It's a term from music composition theory, by the way, in that case.
Do you want us to cut down something we've worked on, or?
You can, yes. Oh, excellent question. Yes, if this is something you've been working on, see that, oh, damn it. I should have said that 20 minutes ago. Yes, if this, because I've already described to you the fact that I sort of use this as remedial. Definitely think of a story you're working on, if that's what's working, and see if you can, in distilling it into this, see if you can figure out anything.
Thank you.
So what this is the sort of campfire storytelling for story geeks. You sit around, and it reminds me of the joke of the guy who goes to the logging camp way in the woods, and after supper, the guys are all sitting around, and the first one says, number 16. Anyone know this joke? Number 16, everyone bursts into laughing, this sort of side-splitting. And the new guy is a little surprised, but what's that all about? And so then a few more minutes go by, and someone else says 46. And everyone just wry chuckles, they're having a great time. So the guy figures, how hard can this be? You know? And he said, but what are you doing? And they say, well, we've been together for so long that we know each other's jokes, so we just numbered them. And we tell them that way. So the guy feels, he's getting into it. So the next night comes back and he starts and he says, number 112. And there's absolute silence. And he says, well, what's wrong? And the other guy says, well, you told it wrong. So that's what this sitting around sharing stories with X's and Y's, and that's real hardcore Frank O'Connor story geek. Who's ready over here? Great.
All right. So, A hijacks a company truck. However, A is forced by dispatcher B to pick up and make a delivery in another part of the country, despite A actually wanting to sell the truck for parts. A makes the delivery without being reported for theft, but is immediately sent by dispatcher B on another pickup and delivery in a different part of the country, not allowing them to leave their job without blowing their cover. A contemplates whether they should keep this job forever without pay or give themselves up to the cops.
Okay, well now, this is a good story, but Frank O'Connor would tell you, now you're getting into the trimmings here, right? But anyway, so what's the sort of the resolution? What's the moment? Because it got distracted. You were saying that what does A realize that changes?
A realizes they could either keep this job forever without getting paid, because they stole the truck, and so they don't have the job technically.
Okay.
Or give themselves up to the cops.
Okay.
And break out of the loop.
Okay. Good. That would be fun to write. That would be you're ready to move on to the treatment, as he calls it. However many scenes you're already describing scenes. You're midway between treatment and the bare bones that O'Connor's after. But good. Okay.
All right.
Anyone from this end of the room? Carrie.
Mine's the opposite. It might not be enough, but I figured it'd be good context. A moves to a small town and meets B. C arrives in a small town and meets A and B. B falls for C. C is killed. A leaves town.
Yeah. Now, and where is town and all that? Who is A? Who is B? Yeah. So how would you? What would be your next step? What would be the next thing you'd want to figure out to bring that to life?
I have no idea.
What would be the next thing? What would be in either? Did you begin to?
Well, maybe which town do you want to be in?
Yeah, when you say move to town, that whole thing about lots of towns. What town is? How they died, all that. Yeah. What? Okay, great. You have one?
Yeah. Sort of splitting between these two here.
Yes.
Well, one is well-liked local down on his luck. Two is out-of-towner befriends him to facilitate a bad act.
Okay.
Three is local guy betrays out-of-towner. And four, local guy permanently ostracized by his own people for his first betrayal.
Yeah. yeah. Now, but O'Connor would say, you're already tying my hands, maybe maybe it isn't a man, that kind of thing, that.
Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't, I just used a pronoun, I could have said his, hers, its.
Yeah, that's right. See, that's the virtue of X and Y.
Right, right.
But yes, there is that nice term. Yeah, no, that could be read. You smiled, that's all I can say, so.
I struggle with condensing.
With what?
With condensing and having.
Oh, yes, okay, yeah. Okay, let's hear it though.
Oh, all right. A brings child B to summer camp A went to as a child and is surprised to see A's teen lover still works there. B is first treated very kindly and suddenly very cruelly by C. B, who seeks for an explanation, goes to where C lives and sees pictures of A all over C's room. Disturbed, B calls A, and upon hearing the other line in C's room ring, realizes that C has captured A and hidden A in the closet for weeks.
Yeah, yeah, but do it now. Do the situation so we get who A, B, and C are once more, because that's what line 1 does. It tells you who the letters are, not the only letters in it. So okay, so let's hear.
I think that's part of the complication is that C is not till the second line.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
no,
fine.
just
In my thing, C wasn't until the second line either, so it has to be okay.
It was that A brings, and I specified, I said A brings child B
Yeah.
to summer
Could
camp.
be a dog. Could be a dog to canine camp.
To the summer camp A went to as a child and is surprised to see their lover C still works there.
Now, I mean, that's pretty good, isn't it? I mean, that would be fun.
I couldn't, you can't.
Okay, you have to be just that line once more.
So sorry.
Yeah.
A brings their child B to the summer camp A went to as a child and is surprised to see their teen lover C still works there.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay.
That's okay. Now maybe that's what we're finding a little bit is the richness of that situation. Even line 1, we're already sort of seeing, that's pretty good. But you see, you got to start with a situation like that. You're off and running. The problem is then you got to really sort of make it happen. But okay, great. Oh, Preston, Miss Preston.
Line 1. A is an aspiring writer and a part-time sawmill worker. A is hired to cut down B's trees. B is a famous writer. A is too embarrassed to tell B he wants to be a writer. A tries to impress B that he is a master sawyer. He cuts his hand. B takes A to hospital for stitches. A returns home to look at half-finished novel. A's hand throbs.
Oh. Well, yeah. Well, but you see that's what if you're married for all these years, you know each other's stories.
Well, it was one of your famous stories that I turned into an ABC.
Anyway, this happens in 1971 or 2 or 3. I was living in New Hampshire, a little town on the Connecticut River, and I was just starting to write. I'd been in the Navy and I'd sort of gotten out, and I was going to write and do all sorts of back to the land things. And it turned out that J.D. Salinger lived in the same town. I mean, he was sort of he was the famous recluse of Cornish, New Hampshire. And I started working in this sawmill, and the owner of it, who was a French-Canadian guy, a wonderful guy, sort of knew that I was, he didn't know much about writing. But anyway, he said, hey, Jerry Salinger's coming over, and he wants to have you cruise his woodlot. And I said, well, I don't know anything about cruising a woodlot with him. He said, no, you just go over and you take the nice trees. So I did. I spent the afternoon with him. Caroline's cutting the hand, my hand throbbing, coming back, looking at my half-finished novel. The hand part isn't right, but looking at the half-finished novel. Anyway, yes. Okay. Way in the back.
Line 1. A car rolls over a cliff and X is the only survivor.
Oh, we already like it. You know, we already wonder why X survived and if the others got squished, but okay.
X is left alone in a valley to survive. X survives and fights for 3 months. X is arrested for causing the crash.
Ah, okay. Now the only problem is we need a Y, right? We need another character, right? And there somewhere, you know, X will have to meet someone on the hiker or something. But yeah, now this is I tell you, this is an experiment. I've never even begun to try to do this with a room full of people. Already that says that situation, you kind of got half the battle done. This isn't hard writing short stories.
Y could be the investigating policeman, right?
Oh, that's right. Y is investigating. Y is the person that charges X.
I have an idea for Y. Y could be a friend that was in a coma, but X thought they were dead, but then they awake like a month. No, not a month. A month is too long. Like a few days later.
Oh yeah. Okay, now I don't want to keep everyone. I mean, you guys are students. You've got lives to live. You've got work to do. Me, I'm just a retired guy, and it doesn't matter. So I don't want to keep anyone past. I know we're sort of past, but let's have a couple more.
I was just gonna say, could Y be like a flashback? Could Y be characters in the car?
Y flashback. Y one of the people that was killed in the car. Some inversion in time.
Some back. Does it work that way? Can you use them that way?
Yeah, no. You realize that time. I used to teach a whole course on time and narratives, and a whole semester talking about nothing but time and narrative, and it really is one you can jiggle it and you can imagine. Okay, imagine Carrie's idea that says, okay, Y is there, and in the end, what you might realize is that wait a minute, the stories about Y was before Y was killed. And after, and you can imagine that sort of the way it sort of blows your mind. Be great. So okay, let's just do one more from this end.
I'll do one.
Great.
A goes to a family gathering. A goes outside with B, but is thinking of C. During A's reflection on C, A recognizes similarities with B. B allows A to discover something about himself.
All right, but you see, you're ducking the you're ducking. It's the sort of the something, but that's right. I mean, gee, you only had 10 minutes, but yes, it's sort of the simple human discourse that we find the truth. Anyway, okay, look, thank you for coming. I hope this, no one else would have done this. I can promise you that. So,
Thank you very much.
I can't be faulted for originality of my content. Anyway, thank you.